Hello, good evening, and welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills this Monday, February 2nd of 2026. Well, we have barely gotten through 1 month of 2026 and already seen the death by shooting in the back and face of 2 U.S. citizens, plus the shooting of Kevin Porter, an African-American who was killed by an off-duty ICE agent in Los Angeles as he was celebrating New Year's Eve. We are seeing legal residents along with hardworking immigrants who may not have their papers yet being abducted, detained, and sometimes deported, even 5-year-old children, as we saw in Minneapolis. Many of my own friends, colleagues, and family members are suffering from the stress and strain of this unhinged presidency, which seems to have a certain death wish for so many Americans and immigrants in this nation. Tonight, we continue the conversation about resiliency, wisdom, and right action with Elisha Christopher of the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Cruz, with a focus on the power of presence. What happens when we become truly present in the midst of chaos, fear, courage, and amazing protests all around us? And Elisha is back in the studio with us after we interviewed Elisha with Reverend Deborah Johnson about a month ago, I'd say, almost exactly a month ago. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Amy. It's really great to be back, and hello to everyone who's listening.
Yeah. I will just reintroduce you for a new audience, perhaps. Elisha Christopher is a reverend whose pronouns are they, them. Elisha is the spiritual director and senior minister at the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Cruz. Their call to leadership began at the Launching Pad, an innovative, intentional, spiritual, and residential community for young adults in Berkeley and Oakland, California. Under Elisha's innovative leadership, residents gained mindfulness and communication skills while managing an open-door ministry. At 30 years old, Elisha was singled out by the renowned Dr. Jean Houston and invited into her foundation's prestigious Emerging Leaders Initiative. Elisha has studied under Dr. Houston for 9 years. Her teachings form the foundation of Elisha's capacity as a teacher and communicator. Reverend Elisha also studied the science of mind philosophy of Ernest Holmes and received their ministerial training through the Holmes Institute and Centers for Spiritual Living School of Spiritual Leadership in Santa Rosa, California. They were licensed as a minister of religious science in 2020 and installed as the spiritual leader of CSL Santa Cruz in 2022. Elisha is also recently married to their husband, Jason. Welcome again.
Thank you.
So I thought we might start on a positive note. I mean, obviously, people know, I think for the most part, what's happening unless their heads are totally in the sand. A lot of my listeners are used to hearing sort of hard-hitting political analysis, but always with a heart, I would say, and sometimes with laughter. But, you know, this is what's happening because I have felt that it's important for people to understand so that they can then respond properly and appropriately. But we're not going to get into the news. I mean, we know the news. We might reference the news. But I wanted to talk about the sense of presence because I've been finding, and of course, as I said, a lot of my friends are in distress. Some people are taking anti-anxiety medication. They never have done that before. Are you experiencing that too?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's the anxieties everywhere. I mean, right, I see it in my community. I know that I experience it myself these days more than usual, for sure. I think a lot of people are.
Yeah. And so for me, the power of presence or being present has been super important. And I'm happy to talk about what my experience has been, but I'd like to start with you because that's where I find home. And for those of you who are listening to the show and are used to more of the politics or the news on our show, this might start off sounding a little airy-fairy. I don't know, but I'm hoping that you will stay with us and keep listening and see how this might relate to how we can actually respond. So, Elisha, when I say the power of presence, what does that mean to you?
Thanks for the question. When we talk about this idea of the power of presence, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the power of being present first. to being fully present in the moment, right? We're living through such remarkably challenging times. And I think that even just the ability for us to find the tools, the capacity, and the ability to stay present in the present moment so that we can bring the fullness of who we are to these situations. One of the things that I've been saying to our community at CSL Santa Cruz a lot these days is that the moment that we're living through, not just in this nation, but really on planet Earth, I think, we can talk about the political crisis that we're going through, but we also have, there's the environmental crisis, we could list the crises that are in front of us right now. And I think that our families, our communities, our nation, and our world need our best thinking. We need our best imagination. We need our best thought capacity to be available. And when we are fully wrapped up in the fear or the anger or we're in reaction mode, our highest level of thinking isn't available. And I think that in order for us to have a conversation about bringing presence forward, that it's really about bringing the fullness of the self to the table in the midst of these crisis times, because if we're just in reaction mode, we may not actually be responding in the best possible ways. And I have a friend many years ago who did a first responder training. And one of the first rules that they learned was when you come up to a crisis moment, if you walk up on an accident or a fire or someone's injured, don't just do something, stand there. Mm-hmm. Take a moment and fully arrive in the situation so that you can fully assess what's happening, fully see where your energy, where your participation, where your skills are needed the most. And if we just run in and we see the first thing that we see, we may miss one of the more important things that needed our attention first.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I mean when we're talking about the idea of practicing this idea of presence or bringing it forward, is bringing that highest level of our awareness to whatever the situation is.
Yeah. I'm going to add a little bit to that. One of the questions I had for you and Rev D, as she's called, but I didn't get to ask it in our interview of a month ago. I had you and Rev D on, then I had Kazuhaga on, and I might bring in some references from both of those shows. This is like a part 3 of our resiliency, our deep resiliency and presence series. But my question was, what if there is no hope? And I know that sounds like a terrible question, but it's something that Kazuhaga talks about in his book, Fierce Vulnerability, is this idea of, a lot of things don't look good. Tipping points have been passed around climate. There was a new report from the UK about biodiversity and how we're losing it so rapidly and in all parts of the world and what that means for us, that ecosystem collapse and so on and so forth. And that all sounds really scary. But I've been thinking about the feeling of when I am very present. And Kazu talks about hospice, like just letting go and accepting that there will be some endings.
Yeah.
Of things, endings of some ecosystems and endings of species and, we're seeing a lot of endings in the United States of our constitutional rights, at least temporarily. These are losses that we can grieve. But also when I'm very present, it's like I'm not even, it's like I'm in the world, but not of it. I am here. I understand what's happening, but I'm also able to be in the moment with what I am doing. And this is tricky because, and it's a deep feeling. It feels like it doesn't matter. Like all this doesn't really matter. And I don't say that to say we should think that it doesn't matter, but because it's such a point of rejuvenation. It's our peace of mind, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a depth to it where you do start to sort of, and Kazuhaga talks about this in his book as well, that, ultimately Kazuhaga is a Buddhist, and, the philosophy is everything is temporary. Everything comes and goes. And so to me, there's a spiritual depth to being present that goes beyond what is happening in this world. And I know that a lot of us have a lot of privilege to be able to still go to the ocean and contemplate the waves or what have you. And I want to talk about that. But do you want to add to what I'm saying here?
Yeah, as you were talking, I it's remarkable to me the amount of, like you say, the tipping points that we've crossed, especially, I'm 42 years old now, and it's like I was in first grade when I first heard the word global warming, and I remember my teacher was like, someday this is going to be a thing, and I remember a number of years ago watching the 3 hurricanes that were stacked behind each other coming off the Gulf Coast, and I remember thinking, oh wow, someday has arrived. And that is continuing, right? We are losing species every day. All of this is happening. And as you were talking, Amy, it made me think about, as a minister, I've had the honor of sitting with quite a number of people in the last number of years as they've been in the process of transitioning or at the end of their life. And, that presence that you talk about when you're sitting with someone and the awareness that there's no turning back. Like this person is going to go away in a physical way, and this life is going to end. And the kind of presence that shows up in those moments when we are able to just sit with someone, and when time almost slows down and there's nothing to do other than just be there. That kind of presence is a gift not only to the person and the family who's there, but it's to everyone who's there in that moment. That ability, like you said, it's something beyond the conditions of this world, where the more of us shows up, and in my belief system, I think I teach that, the divine, the universe is love, is consciousness. It's the one thing that's truly the foundation of all of us. And when we are able to be in those moments, whether it's stewarding the death of a loved one or maybe the death of nature or democracy, or, we're moving through these big deaths in a way that I think it requires that same level of presence, that same level of not acceptance as if there's nothing we can change, but when we have that level of acceptance, something else opens up within us, right? And that, again, it kind of brings me back to that the world needs our best thinking right now. It's when we're able to really slow down and be fully present with life, with what is, in that kind of Buddhist non-attachment like state of acceptance, we can act in a new way when we start fresh from a state of accepting what is, rather than fighting what is, right? Because the more that we fight against something, the more that tears us down and pushes us away. But when we fight for something, when we're in love with something, when the truth is emerging, I don't know, to me, it brings about the awe of life itself. Right? And I think that we're in one of these moments when we need to plug into that sense of awe, that life is sacred, right? Because I think that gets to the deeper level of everything that we're fighting for, is that life is sacred, love is sacred, our rights are sacred. And, to show up to this moment fully present, that's a task in and of itself, and it just makes me think of a friend of mine was doing some work in Ukraine many years ago, and was staying in a house with a group of folks, and there's, multiple generations living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and a dog is barking and a baby's crying, and she's about to lead a conference, and she says, do you have a place that I can meditate? And they ask her, like, do you need like a quiet space and a candle and some incense in order to meditate? Because if that's the case, like, you've got nothing to teach us. You need to learn how to meditate sitting on this couch when the baby's crying and the door's opening and the dog's barking, because that kind of presence that's able to be fully present witnessing what is in the moment regardless. Like, that's what we want to bring to when we're marching on the street. That's what we want to bring to the deep, difficult conversations. That's what we want to have to bring to all the things that are here, is that level of presence, right? I think that's what we want to find, or that's what we're trying to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm in the middle of teaching a class at UCSC. It's called Building an Inner Sanctuary, and so we get into the granular level details of what being present is. And I just want to share a little bit, because it is letting go of certain kinds of thinking. It's letting go of thinking about the future. It's letting go of thinking about the past. It's letting go of thinking about the self and one's self-image and how one's doing in the world. It's letting go even of identity, because when you're really not thinking about yourself, you just are. So there you are, not thinking yourself up as gendered or non-gendered or fluid or as a man or a woman, or as an activist, or as a politician, or as whoever. You just are. And there's something, what I teach the students is there's wisdom there. There's a flow of intelligence that arises when our habitual thinking, our repetitive thinking dies down. Now, it doesn't, you can't snap your fingers and say, make me present now. I actually have a magic wand that works at home that I wave over my head. But, so I think that it might be nice to talk about what does it mean to try to become present. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, what I call the logic of thinking and thought, and how it's like when the clouds are in front of the sun, you can't see the sun, but then the weather changes and you see the sun. And that to me is being present. You feel the sun. So tell me how you would talk about how can we get present? And I know I asked you this on the last show, but I think it's really worth it to keep talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and I want to just harken back to one thing you just said a minute ago about, that kind of levels of self that are kind of available. And one of the teachings that I teach a lot is this idea that there's the lower S self, which is the individual, Elisha, Amy, like the person that I identify as. And then there's the capital S self, which is like the self, the universal self. And that self, that's the one that we want to tap into, that present, right? That was what you were talking about before, I think.
Yes.
Is when we get past all the layers of distraction and identity, that there is a deeper I, there's a deeper presence that's looking kind of through our eyes, and we want to kind of find that witness place. And, that brings me to the how, right? Is, one of the first books, I was probably 15 when I first started meditating and looking into, more spiritual things. And the first book I ever read was called Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. And, so much of his teachings are really about just breath and observation. But the main thing for me is that I think that the thing that we can do to practice becoming fully present is simply the practice of witnessing or observing, right? Many people tell me all the time, I can't meditate because I can't get my mind to get quiet, or I can't meditate because I can't sit still. And, my response to anyone is that doesn't matter. Like, meditation isn't about quieting your mind. Meditation isn't about sitting your body still. Meditation, in my opinion, and I will say perhaps in Thich Nhat Hanh's opinion, which I think is a very highly founded opinion, is that meditation is an act of observing. That it's not about controlling the breath, controlling the body, stopping the mind, but just observing the noticing that I'm breathing, notice the sensations of that breath. Just observe that there's a thought happening in the mind. Just observe that there's an itch or a twitch in the body. And taking 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to just observe without any judgment, just noticing. Not trying to fix, change, or do anything differently. If one just sat for 2 minutes a day and just observed what was, you could call that meditation. And over time, a practice like that bleeds into our regular awareness where we become a better observer. And the more we do that, perhaps we start to notice that it's not that lower S self that's observing or witnessing, but it's that higher S self that is more of a witness who's observing life, who's observing through us as us. And again, that presence then comes with a greater sense of peace, a greater sense of perhaps even personal power, because there's something greater than us that perhaps we start to connect with.
Yeah, I think you can feel it. We're talking to the Reverend Elisha Christopher, who is spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Cruz. You're listening to KSQD at 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM in Santa Cruz and Prunedale and throughout the California Central Coast. We're going to go to a quick break, a little musical break, with a song that I found on the interwebs by looks like a one-child band called Frozen Fish Sticks, and this is going to blow you away.
Iceman knocking door to door, unsure who he's looking for. He says, not to worry, citizens, I'm just looking for the miscreants. Iceman raids my neighbor's house, thanks the man who pointed her out. And when I try to film and shout, he pulls his mask over his eyes, says it's just her neck on the line. Iceman knocks on my door, unsure what he's there for. I say, son, I am a citizen, a resident of innocence. Iceman knocks me to the ground. He says I should've watched my mouth. Freedom of speech is expensive now, and my card's just declined. Now it's my neck on the line. I should've watched my mouth when they came looking for my neighbor. I should've watched my mouth when they came looking for my savior. I should've kept it down, but instead I set the stage for my own doom. Oh, so soon. Iceman knocks on your door, and not sure what he's there for. You say, sir, I am a citizen, and I've been practicing obedience. Iceman knocks you to the ground, steps on your back and laughs out loud. He says, I've got a bigger quota now, and you're the easiest to find. Now it's your neck on the line. You should have spoken out when they came looking for your neighbor. You should have spoken out when they came looking for your savior. You thought that if you kept it down, you wouldn't set the stage for your own doom. But it came so soon. After mine. Was it worth the extra time?
was Frozen Fish Sticks with a song called Iceman Cometh. And the young person who is singing this song looks to me to be like 10 years old. And this sort of leads us into what do we do? How can we respond? But I want to just point to something in that song and in the songs that we've been hearing coming out of Minneapolis and Minnesota by Singing Resistance, just one group. Probably there are a whole bunch of other people singing and making art and making music. Like that just strikes me, and humor, it just strikes me as an expression of the heart, even though that song was so heart-rendering. It was about the heart. Yeah. I don't know if you want to share anything about it.
That was just, wow, I'm still feeling it.
Yeah.
But it makes me again think about the presence that's required in this moment. Our presence is required in this moment, and I think that's why conversations about being grounded and like having a greater idea of self or spirit or something at work here, because this moment requires us to be really, really present and to show up for so much. And, I think about, to me, everything's a metaphor, right? And, it's not lost on me that, this organization that is raining terror on the nation right now is called ICE, and that ice is literally something that's frozen. And I think of hearts and minds that are frozen in a mindset or are frozen by fear or that are closed off, and that, there must, and this is something that I've been contemplating recently, is on the other side of those masks, there's a human. On the other side of the masks, there's someone who is very clearly afraid. On the other side of the mask, there's a soul in there. Even if I disagree with what is happening so fiercely, if I can show up with a level of presence that's willing to look through the mask and into the eyes and try to find that presence, try to find it. I don't know how, we do that necessarily, but it keeps coming up for me that the only way through what's happening now is we have to melt the ice. We have to warm the heart, literally, right? Like we have to warm our collective heart. And this whole thing is about a lack of love. And that if we can find a way to bring love and presence to the situation, we can't fight hate with hate. Dr. King told us that, right? Like you can't, darkness cannot put out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot put out hate, only love can do that. And this moment requires us to show up with a loving presence in the face of something that feels so hateful and maybe even evil. And yet something deep within me knows that love is the only thing that's going to overcome this.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, we have, in our next break, I actually found a song by Singing Resistance in Minnesota. And actually, Singing Resistance is spreading. There are different chapters now. People are singing in Virginia and North Carolina. And the first song is from, I believe, Virginia, or maybe North Carolina. The second one, they're both from Singing Resistance groups, is called "It's Okay to Change Your Mind."
I just heard that today.
And they're playing it outside of the hotels where ICE agents are staying.
Yeah.
And so, well, I'm thinking we are at the half hour mark. Let's go to the break. Let's play those songs. And then we're going to come back. We're having a conversation about the power of presence in these times. We're going to move into what do we do as activists or people who want to be engaged? How can we find our way? How can we do that with sanity and with our hearts full and not going, because when you just said presence, it was a different definition than what we've been talking about, or at least what was in my mind, which was present sort of with nothing on your mind, which I think is super important too. Like we need to be able to let it all go. We cannot carry the burden constantly. It's bad for one's mental health.
Yeah.
I know that for myself and for a fact. So, but you're talking about being present in terms of like, here I am. I'm present for you, and responding from that sense of presence. So we're talking to Elisha Christopher. After the break, feel free to call in if you'd like, if you have a question, if you have a comment. The number in the studio is 900 hang on a second. 831-900. I was mixing those up. 831-900-5773. You can also send a comment or a question to on air, ONAIR at ksqd.org. We're going to go into a break. You're listening to, again, KSQD 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM throughout the California Central Coast. Many voices, one station.
Hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. It's okay, you change your mind, show us the courage, please just behind. Oh, it's okay, you change your mind, and you can join us here. Let's get through. Oh, it's okay, you change your mind, show us the courage, please just behind. Oh, it's okay, you change your mind, and you can join us here anytime.
So that was the song. I am guessing the title is It's Okay to Change Your Mind. And this is thousands of people in the streets of Minnesota singing beneath the hotel rooms of ICE agents. And would anyone have conceived of this response, before Trump got elected, let's say, that this is what we would see as thousands of people singing in the streets? The song before that was also in the streets, has been sung in the streets quite a bit by singing resistance groups, and you can find them on Instagram at Singing Resistance. That song is called Hold On, and they were singing this in neighborhoods where ICE agents had been patrolling and trying to grab people, and people were afraid and shut up in their homes, which is what's happening now. It's happening in our community as well. People are afraid to go out and get groceries. If there's even a rumor that ICE is in town, everybody locks down. People aren't going to work. People aren't going to get medical care. In fact, I just was at a press conference with Jimmy Panetta and a bunch of other folks with nonprofits and law enforcement locally, and a health official was saying, we're not seeing, actually Felipe Hernandez, who's a supervisor in the Watsonville area, was saying people are not coming to get their health care, their benefits, their food, their fresh food. And this is what we're dealing with. And so I guess I want to address the idea of privilege to some extent, because some of us are more afraid than others. And what does it mean to be present when there is a lot of actually very physical threat, which means you could get deported and go to a detention center and die there because people are not getting medical care. People are not getting showers. They're not getting clean water. They're not getting space. They're not getting toilets a lot of the time. The toilets are filthy. And yet, this is something I've been teaching for a long time, and yet also presence can be found there and is useful there. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all. I also am not there, so I don't know if I would find presence or not. I just know it's possible.
Yeah, and I think that that's the idea that, we can be present in any moment. Right, even in the moment when we are locked in our house or we are afraid something is going to happen, that there's always this idea that if we can just slow down enough, that we can get through whatever the moment is right now. And I think that on the other hand, on the other side of the being present, the other things that you were saying, Amy, I think it also calls for those of us who may have more privilege, those of us who might be citizens or have lighter skinned or whatever the particular privilege might be, where you may feel less afraid or more available in this particular moment. I do think this is the kind of moment we need to show up for our neighbors and for our community. To ask someone if we need to get them groceries, to make sure that people are informed as to what's going on, to be the eyes, to be the person who's standing in front of our neighbor or our friend or whomever that may be. I think that the presence that's required, is again, it kind of, I think both of these things are connected, right? It's the presence that we can find the peace and the presence in the moment, and there's a greater presence looking through us. But then it's also the presence to show up, the presence to be here in the moment, and to realize that deeper sense of presence, that deeper sense of self that we were talking about earlier, hopefully if we find that, it awakens a sense of connection and compassion within us, that we realize that we are all one, and that we have to live into that in a greater way. And, we can do the best that we can to breathe through the difficult moments, but we can also be the people who show up for each other.
I mean, I think of Renee Good, and I think of Alex Pretty.
Yeah,
and these people. I mean, Renee Good might not have known that would happen to her that day, but her actions were very brave. My understanding is she was blocking one lane of a street with her car. I'm not sure if that's. I mean, I haven't been able to go and do the research on that, but still, she wasn't. She was there to at least observe ICE agents, and she lost her life. And she was doing this on behalf of others in her community who are not as privileged or were not as privileged as her. And then also with Alex Pretty, I mean, Alex Pretty had a run-in with ICE before he actually was killed, when he was killed, and had a rib broken. So when he saw something happening with ICE agents, he had a gun. He didn't reach for his gun. He wasn't trying to kill anybody. He was trying to help a woman. And knowing the danger that you could get beat up by people. And so I don't know if I'd be able to do any of that. I have no idea what if I get into a situation like that, if I ever will, what my response will be. But I do know that there is something so deep about the human spirit, and that is related to our sense of oneness, which is about, I think, our compassion, that we can understand the fear that people are in. We can almost feel it. And respond. And, that's something that I have had frustrations with. I mean, one of the books that we teach in my class is Bell Hooks on love. And Bell Hooks has talked about the individualism of Western white spiritual traditions, where it's very much about you becoming, at peace and sort of in an insulated way, that's the most important thing. And I struggle with that because I kind of believe that in some part of my body and my being and my brain. I kind of believe that, maybe because one of my first spiritual teachers talked about that quite a bit. But at this point, my spiritual teacher, this was Sydney Banks, is not alive to see what's happening today. I don't know what he would say, but people are interpreting what he said in the past and applying it to this moment. And I feel like, one thing he always said is, don't listen to me, listen to yourself. And one thing I say a lot is, wisdom is a moving target.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I've been grappling with and struggling with. And yet my answer always is for myself, like, I'm doing what makes sense to me. And that's being active in my community, engaging in the political process, showing up at the protests, and doing what I can. And so it's actually quite a lot of things. The show is something. Tell me what you think about activism and engagement from Right Action. What do you think that looks a certain way or feels a certain way? Or I know that's something that you're thinking about actually organizing more within the Center for Spiritual Living.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to, this whole greater conversation we're having about presence and the thing that you were just saying that I wanted to respond to, which was that, in order, you said that, this idea that, we talk about the spirituality in a lot of spiritual teachings, especially in the West, especially in kind of America and the privileged kind of spiritual world, it's all this, it all starts with you get right yourself. And I think that that's important as like the first step. But to me, any true spirituality, any true awakening of a greater, of that should then result in, if you have an awakening of love and compassion, then the result of that should then be to be the activity of that in the world. Right, Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of the Science of Mind, which is a philosophy that I'm a minister in, one of his phrases was treat and move your feet. And treat was his word for do the work in your head, do your spiritual work, and then go live it in the world. Go act upon it, move your feet, take it into the world. Don't just be spiritual on your cushion, but be spiritual in your decisions, in your votes, in the way that you show up in the world. Let that first step, which is do your own spiritual work, because it is an inside job, right? We do have to get clean with ourselves. We do have to get into right alignment with ourselves so that then we're taking action. And my whole thing is that I don't believe there's any one way to be active. Mm-hmm. I think that activism to me is to take action based on your beliefs, right? Based on your values, based on what's important to you. And I think to, what I've learned about, the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, and, there were the people who were marching in the streets who were having the dogs, leashed at them and being beaten by the police. But then there were also the people who were making soup and bandaging those people up and taking them home and caring for them afterwards, right? There were the people who were watching their children while they were out on the street. There were the people who were, and I think that's happening now, right? That there's a place for all of us to take our values and bring them into activity, right? Not just, I believe I'm compassionate and therefore I'm going to pray for you thoughts and prayers, but no, I'm compassionate, therefore I'm going to fight for your rights, therefore I'm going to feed you, therefore I'm going to bandage you if you need bandaging, right? That it extends beyond the self. The work starts with the self, but then if there's any true awakening, it's going to lead us to compassionate action.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to just say, as someone who's been involved in my community quite a bit, serving on the DCC, but also being an activist, sometimes being very critical of the Democratic Party and taking positions that are in opposition to the most of the Democratic Party, although some of those positions are changing now. And then also being friends with a lot of lefties who actually absolutely, are like two wings of the same bird. I'm finding that people are very judgmental of each other and how we're doing our activism. And I look out at the world and I'm like, there is so much that needs to be done at all levels, in every institution. And to say that there's this one way, to me, I mean, it's fair to have a conversation and maybe critique and say, hey, I'm wondering if this is effective. Could we have a conversation? Are you willing to? Or maybe someone isn't like being careful about how they talk about people of color. For example, people are saying, say her name about Renee Good and also about Alex Pretty, and that's not appropriate. It's actually a term that's reserved for people of color because their names are not said. Whereas, of course, Renee and Alex being white people, their names are being said all over the place. So, so there are things like that. But, but I also feel like we are so quick because some of the people closest to us are people working on the same issues or similar issues to us, and they're close to us, so it's easy to attack. It's easy to have judgment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can't reach the White House. We can't reach Stephen Miller. We can't. And so all this frustration maybe comes out with one another. And, I was just involved in a campaign to remove flock cameras from our community, which are mass surveillance. By the way. Oh, you're welcome. And I really had to see the council members as capable of responding to the same concerns and having similar values for privacy, for safety, for our community that we had as a group, that I had in talking with them. And I was told some of those council members would not change on this issue. And they did. And I remember starting the campaign thinking, I somehow want this to be a spiritual campaign, in the sense of like, we're not going to prejudge. We're not coming after the police as individuals. We can certainly talk about policing, but we're not going to attack the police or attack people on the council or attack the police chief. Everyone's, the way I see it, everyone, and my father used to say this a lot, is doing the best they can, given the thinking that they have.
Right.
So then the idea is to change that thinking, to bring in a new thought, assuming that people will want to always do better or want to be compassionate, have love inside of them. Do you want to talk about activism as you see it, and any pitfalls or, that you've seen? I don't know how active you've been. I know we talked to Rev D about that quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I first started getting active actually when Occupy happened was my first protest.
Okay.
And I've been, getting involved more and more and more, especially as what's happening currently.
Yeah, we can't say those words.
It's hard. It's hard not to be. It's hard not to be out, protesting and on the streets right now, because how could we not? I think the thing that keeps coming up for me is, I know we're all angry, and I know we're all scared, and that's part of the motivation to get out on the streets and to do the work and to fight the good fight right now. But I also don't believe that anger is the best use of our energy. And, I love a good protest, but it's also, sometimes I notice how loud it is. We honk our horns and we shout and we have drums and we've got all of our signs and all of that. And sometimes I wonder, would it be more powerful if we were all able to be here in silence? Mm-hmm. And just bring our presence, right? And that, because when we're in a shouting match with the other side, we're just yelling over each other, but if we show up looking for the humanity, like you talked about with the city council members and the flock cameras, you came into this space with a sense of presence, with a sense of knowing that perhaps there's something I can reach in the person on the other side. And that you're not going to get there in a shouting match, right? And I feel that oftentimes our motivation is the thing I often question. I'm so much of I want to know what we're fighting for and what the dream is and what we're seeking to build. We all know what we're fighting against, and we're all really good at naming what's wrong. But what is the vision?
Well, I actually had to write down before we started the campaign, what are we not against? What are we for? And I came up with privacy and a sense of security and a sense of freedom. These are the positive things, which are on the flip side of every no. There's a yes, at least when you're protesting or being active. Yeah, definitely. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean,
actually, you know what? I have a question for you about what you said. Sorry.
Yeah.
Tone policing. Right? People sometimes are angry, and people sometimes are afraid, and people sometimes are sad. And I have experienced tone policing from my own spiritual community. And sometimes I'm actually out there saying things on social media or wherever on podcasts where I'm saying, I want to say this because I'm human. I am going through these emotions. And so I don't want to tell someone else what emotion they can have. If they are in a group that is targeted, and my group isn't quite as targeted right now. I'm not in charge of managing their emotions. So what do you say to that? That's a dichotomy. But I also see, yes, it might be more effective for us to come in and sing to ICE agents sometimes, or, Kazuhaga has an example in his book of people going into a county building or a government building and sitting in a circle and inviting staff into the circle to have a conversation rather than protesting.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. The thought that just kind of popped into my head is that I'm kind of have this little dual definitions happening inside of my head, because I think that there's an importance in allowing anyone who needs to express what they need to express, however they need to express it, right? And however that comes out needs to be valid and needs to be honored and needs to be sacred, whether that's with anger, frustration, whether that's loud, whether that's quiet, however that comes out. And I think it's important for people to be heard. And then there's the, how do I approach a situation where I have someone I perceive as an enemy and I want them to hear me? And I want to get through to them.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there's a difference in how I'm going to approach, I think the world is so nuanced right now, and I think that so much of what everything that we look at is part of so many greater issues, and everything is an overlapping yes and this and that all the time now. Like there's nothing exists in a vacuum, and I think that both can be true, right? That we want to find a way to show up when we are seeking to convince someone who might have power over us or perceived power over to hear or change an opinion, that we want to approach that in a very centered way so that we know that we're heard. But then there's also spaces we need to create to just allow people to be heard and allow people to express without tone policing, without saying you're wrong for feeling this or that, right? And I think that there's kind of, again, strategies for different moments.
Yeah. And I would also say that I know for me, if I stay in anger for too long, if I stay in sadness for too long, I know that for some people it's very hard to control that. I know there are people who are taking medications. There's different ways to get help, and I'm not just saying medications, but also therapies or reaching out to community. I think that's all important, but I think that it becomes a mental burden. And then I was talking to someone, I'm not going to say who, about this, but they were saying to me, how can I find resiliency when so many bad things are happening? It feels very selfish to me. And we had a whole conversation about this in our class. And I said, what's going to happen when you can't get out of bed in the morning? Because that's what can happen to people. And like there are some mornings where I have a hard time getting out of bed. And it's like that, then how useful are you? And so to understand that really our power of presence is like oxygen to us in terms of this is going to be a long I could say fight or struggle. I don't know what else to say. A long building towards the future.
There's a road ahead of us.
Yeah,
for sure.
There's a road, and we really need all of our fresh thinking, sanity, peace of mind. And I know we're not going to always have it all the time. By the way, if you are just joining us, we're talking to Elisha Christopher with the Center for Spiritual Living about the power of presence in dark times. Do you want to speak to anything that I just said?
Yeah, the last thing that you just said, Amy, really, again, struck something for me, which is the idea that right now kind of might even feel very privileged to be able to have the ability to get that resilience and to feel good right now, and maybe even the guilt that comes with feeling good. And I think that cultivating joy in times of oppression is an act of resistance, and that if we have the privilege and the capacity to get a massage, to get ourselves taken care of, to be resilient, to get up in the morning, then you're needed right now. It's your turn.
Yeah, and be grateful for what you have.
Yeah.
So someone is on the line, I believe. And caller, we have a few minutes, so if you could make your question very short, that would be great.
Yes. Hi, this is David calling from Arizona.
Hi, David.
Hi. Thank you so much for having this conversation this evening regarding, sort of these challenges regarding spirituality and becoming centered in the midst of all of what's happening. And for me, it's really challenging. The person mentioned earlier, being part of the Occupy Wall Street sort of movement, and for a lot of Gen Z individuals who have challenges, when we see what is happening in Gaza, when we see what's happening in Iran, to not be so attached to what's happening, I'm finding that to be very challenging. And and when I see that, Democrats that are not standing up to what's happening, because it's a microcosm of what's happening domestically, what's happening abroad, and yeah, I've really had a struggle with that over the last week, especially when tensions have been rising globally.
Thank you. Would you mind taking your answer off the air, because we're going to have to get off the air in a few minutes? Would that be okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thanks for calling in. It's a great question. I'm just going to offer my little piece. What I do is I take a big picture view, which is that effed up things have been happening in this world for eons. I mean, eons, and very effed up things. And so we've had more exposure to some things. What's happened in Gaza has been horrific. I understand that, people can say the Democrats have been complicit. And that's also something that's been happening for a long time. People of color will say this has always been a fascist state for us, and so I think that understanding that we are part of this whole arc of history, for me, that's helpful. It's not new. And so how do we find our balance? Because with all the horror that's happening, we have to find balance. We have to bring joy. That's also part of the human experience. That's also part of these eons of human history is the joy, is the music. And so it's so important, I think, to honor that and to not sink under the weight of bad things that are happening, because we need you, Dave. Do you want to quickly, we have 2 minutes. Oh my gosh, you have 1 minute.
And the last thing that I would say too is that I think that also part of the practice of this idea of presence and being fully present is really feeling what there is to feel. And, there's grief to feel. Yeah. There's tears to be shed.
Sure.
There's screams to let out. And that has to be part of the process as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Elisha Christopher. Do you have a website or something you want to?
Yeah. So if you want to know more about me or the Center for Spiritual Living, Center for Spiritual Living is CSL. That's CSLSantaCruz.org is our website. We do have regular Sunday services at 11 a.m. at the Resource Center for Nonviolence on Ocean Street. You can check out the website and you can get a hold of me through there as well.
Great. If you appreciated this program, join us every first Monday at 6 p.m. for our live broadcast, and then pick up our edited podcasts at Apple, Spotify, and at YouTube under the KSQD YouTube channel as the podcast Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. Find us on Facebook and Instagram as Amy Chen Mills and Moment of Truth Collective. It really helps boost our program if you like, rate, and share our show at your favorite site, and write a review. Visit our Substack, Moment of Truth Dispatch, for more on everything we talk about here. Plus, thanks to our entire team, Nyanko Nyasu, Mei-Ling Obanada, and Todd Zimmerman. Theme song by Zimmerman of Nativerse Studios. Logo by Kathy Krizik. And thanks to the entire KSQD team on the California Central Coast. Remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy.